So if an event is likely to happen, we consider it to be probable. So we could use the words likely. We can use the words probable to describe an event. If an event is unlikely to happen, it is considered improbable. So unlikely and improbable we could use to describe the event. So let's look at an example here. We have Luis who has coins in his pocket. He's got 9 pennies, 2 nickels, and 2 dimes. One coin falls out. How likely is it that it's a quarter? Does he have a quarter? He doesn't have a quarter. Therefore, that is actually impossible. Not is it only improbable, it is impossible. There is no quarter to fall out of his pocket. How likely is it that it's going to be a dime? Well, considering there's only 2 of them compared to pennies, it is unlikely or it is improbable. Both would be good words to use. What about a nickel? Well, same thing. There's only 2 of them. It is unlikely or improbable. What about a penny? Well, he had 9 pennies. The majority of them, there were mostly pennies in his pocket. So that is likely or it is probable. Probable. Oh, oops, sorry, that's supposed to be an L. There we go. Probable. If we wanted to compare, we could say it is more likely that he will have a penny fall out of his pocket than a dime. All right, so as we've discussed, it is impossible for the coin to be a quarter. He doesn't have any. It is likely that it is a penny because that's what he mostly has. The coin is most likely to be a penny. It is unlikely or improbable that the coin is a dime or a nickel because he only had 2 of these. It is equally likely that it is a dime or a nickel because he had the same number of those. We could use a line of continuum to show how likely an event is. If it is likely, if it is unlikely, if it's impossible, if it's possible, if it's certain. If it's certain, it absolutely must take place. So in this case, there's nothing that is certain. If he only had pennies in his pocket, it would be certain that the coin that fell out was a penny. But in this particular example, there is no certain example. Right, to practice. Decide whether each outcome is impossible, possible, or certain. And remember, an outcome is the result of a probability experiment. So if Tanisha tosses an eraser, it will. And use the words impossible, possible, or certain to describe how likely it is, what's the probability of it landing on its side, of it landing on one of its ends, of it splitting apart, of it bouncing, of it rolling. Press pause and with your elbow partners right now discuss whether or not you think it would be impossible, possible, or certain. All right, let's take a look. Land on its side. Well, I would say that's definitely possible. Ooh, let's choose a pen here. Definitely possible. To land on one of its ends. It's also possible. Now she's just tossing it. It's going to split apart. That's pretty impossible. It's made out of rubber. That it will bounce. That's pretty certain almost, really. It's rubber. That it will roll. That's possible, I suppose. All right. So using the words impossible, possible, and certain to describe. Now we're moving into lesson 5, which isn't that much different. It's just now whether or not outcomes are more likely or have a higher chance of happening. So comparing the likelihood of events. So let's take a look at our connect section here. This spinner has 7 equal sectors, so remember the size has to be important. They should all be the same size when you're comparing them. There are 7 possible outcomes where the pointer can land. One outcome that is possible is landing on 3. It's also possible to land on 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So those are our possible outcomes. It is impossible to land on 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 because they aren't on our spinner. In this case, is anything more likely than anything else? Well, no, because all of the pieces are the same size. So there is an equal likelihood of landing on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. Let's take a look at another spinner. This spinner has 4 equal parts. It has an 8, an 8, an 8, and an 8. The outcome here is certain that you are going to land on an 8. There is no other possible outcome, so we can say it is certain that you will land on an 8. Here we have another spinner. This spinner has 8 equal sectors. They're all the same size. It has 2 sectors labeled A, and 2B, 3B, 2C, and 1D. Well, now they're not all equally likely. What is equally likely? Well, let's take a look. A has 2, C has 2. So they would be considered equally likely, A and C. What is the least likely or less likely? Well, D only has 1, so that would be the least likely or less likely. You are less likely to land on D than you are on A. What are you most likely to land on? Well, I would say B because there's 3 sections of B, so B is more likely or most likely because there's more of them. There's a bigger area of B than there is of any other letter. So landing on B is more likely than landing on A or D. Now, to practice, we have Gina and Tibur who are playing a game with this spinner. You can see that here. Gina wins a point if the spinner lands on a triangle. So Gina, triangle. Tibur wins a point if the pointer lands on a square. All right. Is this a fair game? Use the words more likely, less likely, and equally likely to explain your answer. Press pause and discuss that with your elbow partners right now. What is more likely? What is less likely? What is equally likely? And then as a result, is it fair or is it not? Press pause and do that now. All right, well, let's take a look. What are our possible outcomes? We can get a circle, we can get a triangle, and we can get a square. How many circles are there? Well, first of all, let's check. Are they equally sized pieces? Yes, they are. Okay. Then how many of each are there? Well, how many circles are there? Well, there's 1. How many triangles are there? There's 3. How many squares are there? There's 4. So who's more likely to win? Well, you're more likely to get a square than you are to get a triangle. So it's more likely that Tibur will win as Gina. So is it a fair game? Well, there's 4 squares compared to 3 triangles. It isn't a fair game. What could we do to make it fair? Well, perhaps if Gina landed on a triangle or a circle, she could win. And then Tibur could still have squares, and then there's 4 and 4, which would make it equally likely that both would win. All right, moving on to our concept practice. We now need to be working on page 274, 275, numbers 1, 2, 4, 5, and page 278, numbers 1, 2, and 7. Describing likelihood of an event using words such as possible, impossible, certain, as well as likely, unlikely, equally likely, and so on. If you would like, we have discussed in daily practice also using a fraction to determine probability, which is what we will get into in grade 6. So if you'd like to challenge yourself, include both. Don't replace the fraction with the words. You need to show me the words. That's the grade 5 curriculum. But if you want to challenge yourself, and I think many of you are capable, go ahead and try to use both the words and the fraction. Of course, as you're working along, if you have any questions, please let me know.